Okay, I want to show you something, a logical problem, not a physics problem, pure logic, and this problem, once you really see it, destroys the logical foundation for believing in God. Not proves God doesn't exist, destroys the logic that's supposed to prove God does exist. The problem is very simple. A child could understand it. In fact, children often ask this question before they're taught to stop asking it. Here it is. If God created the universe, what created God? Now, the standard theological answer is, nothing created God. God is eternal. God is uncaused. God is the thing that doesn't need a creator. But if God doesn't need a creator, why does the universe need a creator? You see the problem. Theology says the universe must have a cause because everything that exists has a cause. Music, that cause is God, but then God exists, so, by the same logic, God must have a cause. Theology responds, God is special. God doesn't need a cause. God is the exception. But if you're allowed to make exceptions, if you're allowed to say this thing exists, but doesn't need a cause, then why not apply that exception to the universe itself? Why bring God into it at all? This is the logical problem, and I want to show you that there is no escape. Every way theology tries to solve this problem creates bigger problems. Every attempted solution contradicts itself. Let me walk you through it. I'll try every escape route I can think of, and I'll show you why each one fails. The first attempted escape, God is a necessary being. This argument goes back to medieval philosophy. Aquinas, Anselm, the ontological argument in various forms. The idea, some things are contingent. They exist or might not exist. They depend on something else for their existence. The universe is contingent. You are contingent. This chair is contingent. But not everything can be contingent, because if everything depended on something else, you'd have infinite regress. Never get to an actual explanation. So, there must be something that's necessary, something that exists by the necessity of its own nature, something that couldn't fail to exist. That's God. God is the necessary being, the thing that must exist. The thing whose non-existence is impossible. Therefore, God doesn't need a cause. Necessary things don't need causes. They exist necessarily. Okay, sounds good. But here's the problem. What makes God necessary? Why is God the thing that necessarily exists, rather than something else? Music, you can't just define something as necessary and call it a day. I define God as the thing that must exist. Therefore, God must exist. That's circular. That's defining God into existence. And if you can define God as necessary, I can define the universe as necessary. The universe is the thing that must exist. Why not? What's the logical difference? The response. God is necessary because of God's nature. God's essence is to exist. Existence is part of what God is. But that's still circular. You're assuming God has a nature that makes existence necessary. But why does God have that nature? What makes God's nature such that existence is necessary? And more importantly, if existence can be necessary, if something can exist just because it's the kind of thing that must exist, then why can't that be true of the universe? Why can't the universe be the thing that necessarily exists? Why do we need God as an intermediate step? The necessary being argument doesn't solve the problem. It just relabels it. Instead of what caused God, it's why is God the necessary thing rather than something else. Same problem, different words. The second attempt to escape, God is outside time. God is eternal. Not eternal meaning exists forever in time. Eternal meaning outside time altogether. This argument says causation requires time. A cause comes before its effect. But if God is outside time, God doesn't need a cause because causation doesn't apply to timeless things. The universe is in time. Time began with the universe, but God is outside time. For God can create time, can create the universe, but doesn't need a cause because causation is a temporal concept. Okay, this is more sophisticated, but it has problems. First, what does it mean to be outside time? Time is the dimension in which events happen, in which change occurs. If God is outside time, God cannot change, cannot act, cannot create. Creation is an act. An act is an event. Events happen in time. If God created the universe, that's an event. Events require time, so creation requires time. But if God is outside time, God cannot perform the act of creation. You can't have it both ways. Either God is outside time, in which case God can't do anything, can't create, can't act, or God acts in time, in which case God is subject to causation and needs a cause. Second problem, even if we accept that God is outside time, why does that exempt God from needing an explanation? Causation might be temporal, but explanation isn't. We can ask, why does this timeless thing exist rather than nothing? The question makes sense. Why is there a timeless God rather than no timeless God? Being outside time doesn't make you immune to the question, why do you exist? It just means the answer can't be in terms of temporal causation. But you still need an answer. And if the answer is God just exists timelessly, no explanation needed, then why can't the answer for the universe be the universe just exists timelessly, no explanation needed? If timeless existence exempts you from needing explanation, then a timeless universe doesn't need God. The universe itself can be the timeless thing. Being outside time doesn't solve the problem. It just moves it to a different domain. The third attempted escape, God is the uncaused cause, the first cause, the prime mover. This is Aquinas' cosmological argument. Everything in motion was put in motion by something else. Every caused thing was caused by something else, but you can't have infinite regress of causes, so there must be a first cause, an uncaused cause, something that starts the chain, but isn't itself part of the chain. That's God. God is the thing that causes, but isn't caused, the mover that isn't moved, the creator that isn't created. Okay, but why can't the universe be the uncaused cause? The argument says, everything in the universe is caused. Therefore, the universe as a whole needs a cause outside itself. That cause is God. But wait, why does the universe as a whole need a cause? Each thing in the universe has a cause within the universe. The universe as a whole is just the collection of all these things. Why does the collection need an external cause? Here's an analogy. Every sheep in the flock has a mother. Does the flock have a mother? No. The flock is just a collection of sheep. It doesn't need a mother separate from the mothers of the individual sheep. Similarly, every event in the universe has a cause within the universe. The universe as a whole, the collection of all events, doesn't need a cause outside itself. But even if we grant that the universe needs a cause, why does that cause have to be God? And more importantly, why doesn't God need a cause? The argument says, infinite regress is impossible. We need a stopping point. That stopping point is God. But why is God the stopping point? If we need a stopping point, if we need something uncaused to stop the regress, why can't that stopping point be the universe itself? Why insert God as an intermediate step? The universe can't be uncaused, but God can be uncaused, and God caused the universe. That's just adding an extra step that doesn't actually solve anything. If the problem is infinite regress, and the solution is an uncaused thing, the simplest solution is the universe is uncaused. No God needed. The uncaused cause argument is special pleading. It says the universe can't be uncaused, but God can be. Why? What's the logical difference? There isn't one. The fourth attempt to escape, it's a mystery. God's nature is beyond human comprehension. We can't understand how God exists without a cause. We can't understand how God is outside time. These things are mysteries. And that's okay. Faith means accepting mystery. This is the last resort. When logic fails, retreat to mystery. But here's the problem. If you admit God's existence is a mystery, if you admit you don't understand how God can exist without a cause, then you've given up the logical argument for God. You can't have it both ways. You can't say the universe must have a cause that causes God, and then say we can't understand how God exists without a cause. It's a mystery. If you don't understand how uncaused existence works, you can't use uncaused existence as an explanation for God. You're explaining something you do understand, the universe, with something you admit you don't understand, God. That's not explanation. That's mystery replacing mystery. And if you're allowed to invoke mystery, if you're allowed to say this thing exists, I don't know how or why, it just does, then why not apply that to the universe directly? The universe exists. I don't know why. It's a mystery. That's just as valid as God exists. I don't know why. It's a mystery, and it's simpler. No extra assumptions. Occam's razor. If you're going to accept something exists without explanation, accept the thing you already know exists, the universe. Don't multiply mysteries by adding God, but there's a deeper problem with the mystery escape. It's intellectual surrender. It's giving up on understanding. It's saying this is too hard to figure out, so I'll just believe it. Science doesn't do that. Science says we don't understand yet. Let's keep trying. Science accepts uncertainty. Accepts I don't know. But science doesn't replace I don't know with God did it, and it's a mystery. It's a mystery is giving up. It's admitting the logic doesn't work. It's retreating from the problem by declaring the problem unsolvable. And if the problem is unsolvable, you haven't proven God exists. You've just admitted you can't explain God logically. Now let me show you why this problem has no solution. Why every escape attempt fails and must fail. The problem comes down to a simple logical structure, a dilemma. Two options, both create contradictions. Option 1, everything that exists has a cause. If this is true, then God has a cause, and that cause has a cause. And that cause has a cause, infinite regress, no ultimate explanation. God doesn't solve anything. Option 2, some things don't need causes. They just exist. If this is true, then we don't need God to explain the universe. The universe itself can be the thing that doesn't need a cause. God is unnecessary. You have to pick one. Either everything needs a cause or some things don't. If everything needs a cause, God needs a cause. Infinite regress, no solution. If some things don't need causes, universe doesn't need a cause, no God needed. Either way, God doesn't help. Now, theology tries to thread the needle, try to say, most things need causes, but God is special. God is the exception. God doesn't need a cause, but that's special pleading. That's making an exception without justification. Why is God the exception? What makes God special? If you say because God is necessary, or because God is outside time, or because God is the first cause, you're just restating the exception. You're not justifying it. And if you're allowed to make exceptions, if you're allowed to say this thing exists without a cause, then the simplest exception is the universe itself. The universe exists, we know it exists, we observe it, we measure it. If we need something that exists without a cause, why not the thing we already know is there? Why add God as an intermediate step? The universe needs a cause, so there's God who doesn't need a cause, who caused the universe. That's just pushing the question back one step. If God can exist without a cause, the universe can exist without a cause. If the universe needs a cause, God needs a cause. You can't have it both ways. This is not an empirical problem. This is pure logic, a contradiction in the structure of the argument, and contradictions can't be resolved. They can only be exposed. So, what does this mean? What are the implications? It means the cosmological argument, the argument that the universe needs a cause, and that cause is God, doesn't work. It's logically incoherent, it contradicts itself, it doesn't prove God doesn't exist. You could still believe in God for other reasons, faith, experience, cultural tradition. But you can't use logic to prove God exists. The logic destroys itself. Here's why. The cosmological argument relies on the principle that everything needs a cause. That's the premise. Without that premise, the argument doesn't start. But then the argument concludes with something that doesn't need a cause. God, the conclusion contradicts the premise. If everything needs a cause, God needs a cause. If God doesn't need a cause, the universe doesn't need a cause. You can't have both. And every attempt to escape this, God is necessary, God is outside time, God is the uncaused cause, it's a mystery, fails because each one either restates the contradiction or admits defeat. This doesn't mean the universe created itself. It doesn't mean the universe is eternal. It doesn't mean we understand where the universe came from. It means invoking God doesn't help. It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't answer the question. It just relabels the mystery. Why does the universe exist? Becomes why does God exist? Same question, same mystery, but now you have two mysteries instead of one. The universe and God. If you're comfortable with mystery, if you're okay with saying, I don't know why this exists, it just does, then be comfortable with the universe being that mystery. Don't multiply mysteries by adding God. And if you're not comfortable with mystery, if you demand an explanation for why things exist, then God doesn't provide that explanation. Because God exists, and you need to explain why God exists. And the explanation for God's existence faces the same problem as the explanation for the universe's existence. The logical problem that destroys God is this. The concept of God is supposed to solve the problem of existence, but it doesn't. It just relocates the problem, and in relocating it, it creates a logical contradiction. Let me tell you what I think this means. Not what I feel, not what I hope, what the logic shows. Either everything needs a cause, including God, which leads to infinite regress and provides no ultimate explanation. Or some things don't need causes, in which case we don't need God to explain the universe, because the universe itself can be the thing that doesn't need a cause. Theology wants it both ways. Wants to say the universe needs a cause, God, but God doesn't need a cause. God is special, but you can't have it both ways, not logically. Either causation is universal or it's not. If it's universal, God needs a cause. If it's not universal, the universe doesn't need God. Every attempt at escape fails. God is necessary, circular, and why isn't the universe necessary? God is outside time, doesn't exempt from needing explanation. And causation requires time anyway. God is the uncaused cause, special pleading. Why not the universe? It's a mystery, intellectual surrender, and simpler to accept the universe as the mystery. No way out. The logic is unforgiving. This is not an argument against God's existence. This is a demonstration that the logical foundation for believing in God, the cosmological argument, the argument from causation dash, is contradictory. You cannot construct a logically consistent God who solves the problem of existence. The concept destroys itself. God is supposed to be the answer to why is there something rather than nothing, but God is something. So, the question applies to God too, and any answer that works for God would work for the universe without God. The concept of God doesn't solve the problem. It is the problem. It takes a mystery, why does the universe exist, and replaces it with a bigger mystery, why does God exist, while pretending it solved the original mystery. That's not logic, that's misdirection, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The logical problem is right there, in the foundation, in the structure of the argument itself. Either everything needs a cause, or it doesn't. Either way, God is unnecessary. Either way, the argument destroys itself. That's the logical problem that destroys God. Not God's existence, God's logical necessity. The concept cannot be constructed without contradiction. And contradictions cannot be true.